Libraries have the responsibility and the role, and have had for 5,000 years, preserving the records of humankind, and science fiction is one of those records representing the imagination, which often turns into reality. That it's publicly accessible is important in that it does represent an area of research. It represents an area of popular culture.
The Eaton Collection started in 1969, which means that's when it came here. It actually was the collection of Dr. J. Lloyd Eaton, who was a pulmonologist in Oakland, California. And he had a great interest in science fiction. He collected first editions. They went from the mid-19th century up to about 1950, about 7,500 books. When he died, his family was looking for a library to take these books because it was science fiction. Libraries did not want it. So we had a university librarian here in 1969 named Don Wilson, who was a fan of science fiction, and he also had the vision to know that if no library was collecting science fiction, and science fiction was as popular as it is, somebody is going to want to study that someday. And somebody needs to take a collection like that, especially a collection that was in mint condition. And so we accepted the Eaton Collection, and that was the nucleus. The Eaton Collection is actually what is called a level 5 collection, which means that we collect comprehensively. We collect everything. It's not the kind of collection where I say, oh, that's a silly science fiction book, I don't want that here. We want it all. We want media. We take some fan collections that are characteristic, that might have three-dimensional objects in it. So basically, whatever it is, Eaton is probably interested in it. If it's SF, if it's science fiction or fantasy, we're interested.
This will be the library where people will come to study the scientific culture in the United States in the 20th century, just as you study the 19th century with the Bancroft. So I mean, it's going to turn into a major world-class library of that sort. That's the way I see it. I mean, it's been long starting in this direction, but now I think science fiction is being recognized all over the place, and certainly in academia. So we're on the ground floor to do something amazing here.
It is the place to go to study science fiction. It's the largest research archive for science fiction and fantasy in the world.
The collection, when it began, was essentially a print archive. And for the longest time, it remained a print archive until Melissa Conway and others felt that it needed to diversify what it was holding. It needed to respond to the explosion of science fiction across the media landscape, especially in the wake of Star Wars in the 70s. There's been a transition, and I think it's a transition that corresponds with just a generational shift from an interest in the print history of science fiction to an interest in the visual culture of science fiction. Not just film, but video games, comics and graphic novels.
I think comic books are the way most people meet science fiction for the very first time. It certainly was for me. Superman. Things that my parents might not have tolerated me reading. In the middle of the summer, if I went to a drugstore and picked up a bunch of Superman comics, it wasn't the same level of disapproval. And I think, too, that comic books are wonderful art. Comic books taught me all different things about different perspectives of characters, and they're very succinct. I think that people now realize the full value of comic books, and not just the collectible value or the monetary value, but the actual literary and sociological value of comic books is immense. Top treasures, things that I like to bring out, definitely the 1517 Paris imprint. That's the second edition of More's Utopia. It was done in Paris. It's still in its original vellum wrapper. It's in mint condition. It's a real treasure. And that was a donation. That was an outright donation. We have the first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, extremely rare. We have the first edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, extremely rare. We have the first edition of most H.G. Wells most Chauvin. These are great treasures. The Fanzine Collection is the biggest of any collection, and it's so comprehensive that I'm really very proud of that. I have a PhD in medieval studies, and because I didn't come out of the fan community, I wasn't sure why we would take the amateur writings of fans. And then I thought, from the perspective of a medievalist for whom we never know what the common people were thinking, I thought, what a cache of the thoughts of people who are not famous writers, but people who are really competent writers who have interesting things to say. Ray Bradbury started in fanzines. I'm not sure everybody knows that, but many of the top authors in science fiction and fantasy started with fanzines as teenagers. So those are of great value in terms of studying the author's development.
Science fiction is actually the precursor to science. Almost anything that becomes reality in science has been mentioned at some point in terms of science fiction. As I have gotten to know some of our most prominent writers, they've indicated to me that the federal government has these sessions in which they are inviting science fiction writers to come in and brainstorm about resolving a problem or what the future foreholds. So even the government takes it seriously.